Okay, I haven't done something like this in a while, but this is just going to be a quick hit, going over a little bit of the rules and feel of the game. This is Undead by Steve Jackson Games. One of their old plastic case games. You could slip it in a coat pocket or something, it's fine. It's really the Dracula story. Not the entirety of the story, but the London hunt for Dracula. And it's meant to be played as a 3 or more player game, with one player running as a game master, and the other two players or more. One of them will be Dracula, and anyone else is the hunters. It really probably can't handle more than 4 or 5 players, because the hunters will seldom have more than one or two parties in the game. So then they kind of work to collaborate together only. And even so, it really is meant as a 3-player game. There's a 2-player variant, however, which I just played with my wife, and that's kind of why I'm covering this. And that 2-player variant, you're using the same map, and one person goes out of the room while the other one plays around on the map. Then everything's kind of turned over and hidden. The other person comes in and plays. So kind of a double blind, but, well, to tell you the truth, the investigators aren't on the map when Dracula's fiddling around with them. And they aren't anyway. The game comes with a bunch of little pieces of furniture, which are just used kind of as, well, they're used kind of as dummy counters. And there's going to be things flipped over in most of the locations on the map. Now, in the 2-player game, one of Dracula's goals, really, and to some extent the hunter, is to try to confuse the other player with the pieces that are flipped over on the map. He only has certain limitations to what he can turn and what he can't. When there's a game master, the game master is there in part to confuse both players by flipping lots of counters around and moving them about. All right. You also have, and you'll see, I mean, these were just cut out of cardstock. That's what the games came with back then. Car Wars was the same way. Little green, awful green things, stuff like that. You also have these coffin counters. And one of the things with the game is Dracula starts the game with 50 coffins. And he's hauling them around in a wagon, and he dumps them off in known locations to him, which are these crypts that he's hiding out in. And one of the things the hunters want to do is they want to eliminate Dracula's coffins as they're going. You also have character counters. Here we have Renfield. He'll be probably never actually on the map except during combat. Most of the characters aren't. But sometimes maybe a character counter or something is useful to help confuse the situation. So you might put them there. In the 2-player game, you wouldn't do that as much. The investigators. Oh, a whole bunch of people. People from the story. Like here we have Homewood. People who are not. Like here we have Holmes. Just to add a little variety to the choices of characters you can have. Different forms for Dracula. Here he is in mist form. Alright. So let me try to explain kind of how the game starts. First of all, at the beginning of the game, Dracula sets up a bunch of furniture wherever he wants to. It works out pretty nicely. You can put 2 pieces of furniture in each location, and that uses up all the furniture. Then he's going to come onto the board, and he's got to come on starting somewhere along the Thames, and he just gets dropped off there with his coffins loaded up on a cart. Where do you want to go? You use some unused counter to mark his time. Now Dracula is going to be moving between 9 p.m. and 5 a.m., whereas the investigators go from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. And pretty much most of the things in the game take an hour to do. It takes like an hour to move from one location to another. It takes an hour to load up coffins into your cart. It doesn't matter how many, actually I think that's per 10 coffins. It takes an hour to search for a victim if you're Dracula. It takes an hour to go from one location, one known location in an area to another known location in the area. Just a lot of things like that all take 1 hour. Some of them take a little longer, and those are specified in the in the rolls. Now, each character is rated for some abilities in combat. For the most part, they have a strength, which really isn't their strength so much as their hit points. Dracula's at the high end with 25 points. Some of it, a very, very powerful female vampire would be at 24. Van Helsing and Renfield are at like 12. And this is just how much damage they can take without being killed. Combat itself is going to be handled on these little other inserts. And I don't know what that was. You move around on the map. Humans are able to move 3 spaces or 2 spaces in attack. Vampires are counted as humans unless they're in a different form. So Dracula can take wolf or bat form, in which case he can move around a little faster. The wolf is better at attacking, and there's this little cross-reference. So for example, if a wolf attacks a hunter, he hits on a 3, 4, 5, or 6, and does a die -1 of damage to their strength. Okay, great. The combat is fairly simple. I'm not going to go into all the rules there. It makes for a little tactical map, kind of like a Titan game or something, where you just get to fight situations out when the combat arises. But that's not what most of the game is, although it often is how the game's going to end. So the goal of the game for Dracula is to collect victory points, which he gets by taking victims and having them rise as undead, and I think he gets points for killing investigators. He gets points, I don't remember what else. Can't think of anything else that he gets points for. But he's got to do that within a certain time limit, because the investigators will win if they can destroy all 50 coffins that Dracula has. He'll have nowhere left to sleep. Those coffins each have a little bit of his dirt in them from Transylvania, so he can, survive here in London, outside his native Earth. So that's one way that each side can win, basically. Now, the vampire hunters can, of course, also win by just killing Dracula outright. And Dracula can win by killing all the vampire hunters outright. Now, for Dracula to win with 20 victory points, he has to keep the credibility index below 20. Once it hits 20, the game's over. It's too hot for him in London. There's special rules for Mina. She's worth more points as a combination investigator and victim at the same time. Let's see if we got anything else here. Okay. So the main line of the game is done with one player and the GM in the room together, interacting, doing some searching, whatever. And then that player leaves and the other player comes in and interacts with the GM. If there's no GM, the single player interacts with the game board as if there's a GM. And in some cases, the other player will have to act as the GM for them. Let's see what else we got here. Okay. So, let's look at what Dracula can do. And he wakes up at 9 p.m. every night, and he's hungry. He loses a point of strength immediately. He has to feed to maintain himself in a way that nobody else does. Of course, other people can just get a hot dog at the hot dog stand. So I guess we're just not as worried about their feeding. Okay. He's got a sequence of actions. One is he can look for servants. That'll be Renfield or a wolf. He can do some of these 10-point things. I covered most of these. Searching for a victim, he rolls a die. If he gets a 6, he finds someone. He can only check each area twice. Searching for scent of the vampire hunters, that doesn't really work too well in the 2-player game, so I'm not really familiar with it. But essentially the GM can allow wolf form to look for the hunters and then start hunting them. But he's got to be aware that they exist before he can do that. It costs Dracula a point to change shape to anything except vampire shape or human shape or whatever. He can summon his servants in combat if they're in the same area. He can order his female vampires to move once per night, one area. He can check out locations, etc. Now, a lot of this is very mechanical, like searching for a victim. You roll a die. Hey, did I find someone? No. Hey, did I find someone? No. Oh, now I did. You know, and you've got a limitation per area how many times you can do that, twice per night per area. Visiting a victim, once you visit one, then you have to you have the option to go, once you found a victim, to go and see if you can get a little snack off her. And you have to sneak in, and in human form, that means you roll a die. On a 1, you get seen, and you run away. And there's a 50% chance that there'll be a newspaper story, which is how the hunters find out about what Dracula's up to. Otherwise, they're just hunting around looking for coffins for no real reason. But once they start hearing what he's up to, then what they can do is they can go visit that house. And if they get cooperation from the people who live there, which is a 50% chance, they can find out, hey, was she bitten by a vampire? Now, if Dracula tried to get into a house and was scared away, it looks like he wasn't there. On the other hand, he could try to get into a house and get caught leaving, in which case the hunters have a clue that he's there. They go there and they find out, hey, he bit her. She gets 2 dice of strength to begin with, and every time Dracula bites her, her strength goes down by a die. She'll recover 1 strength per turn, or per day. Okay. Now, it's possible, if Dracula fails to see a victim twice in a row for whatever reason, he can look for a second victim. He can never have more than 2, but if he has 2, he can visit them both in the same night, which is really a powerful situation, actually. And you kind of want to aim for that if you can. But you get victory points for killing them. So usually you can't maintain that for long. It's just, you're on this time limit as Dracula. You will lose all your coffins if you don't succeed in, if you don't push your victory conditions forward. Now, you can't drag your coffins around with you unless you're going to park them somewhere. So you can't leave them outside your victim's house and then come back and keep going. So it's kind of expensive because then you have to unload your coffins and reload them up, and that's a painful situation. Okay, so when Dracula visits a house where a victim is, if the hunters are there, if they've gotten cooperation, they're allowed to sit an all-night vigil with the victim. If they do that, they're going to be tired the next day, which means they all lose a point of strength, unless they sleep the next day. If they stay up a complete day and night, they each lose a point of strength. And to recover that, they have to sleep for a complete day and night. Now, if Dracula does decide to visit even though they're there, he has a number of options of tactics he can use to try to trick them. One of them is just burst in the door. And that's not really a tactic. If the hunters are there, he fights them. And that's pretty much the best the best the hunters can do anyway. Stealth, he can try to sneak in as bat or mist. Diversion, he sends a servant or a female vampire, knock on the door, call for a candygram, and while they're trying to hide from the land shark, he goes up and has a snack. He can hypnotize a servant inside the house, or actually hypnotize the girl to come to him from inside the house, and she has to be weak for that to work. If there's inside, he can try to hypnotize or trick a servant in which to get in, and he can also disguise himself, and that's only got at best a 50% chance of working. All of these tactics, once they're used once and work on the investigators, they can start protecting themselves against them. Each investigator that's present with a party can protect against one tactic. So eventually it becomes kind of a guessing game, perhaps, where Dracula has to pick a tactic, but the vampire hunters know all of his tactics, so he's got nothing that's safe. And if they select one, well, he ends up probably having to fight them. However, if he sneaks in, the hunters just find out, oh, she looks worse, or there's another reason that they might be staying up all night with her. If she's been killed, they have to stay up all night on a special death watch to prevent to maintain garlic, cloves of garlic around her neck, and crucifixes on her and everything. And if Dracula succeeds in sneaking in then, he's able to remove those, and then she will rise as a vampire. Of course, if she does rise as a vampire, they know where she lives, and they know where she's going to be buried. So they can just go and stake her. There's a danger to that because there's some risk that the police will catch you while you're trying to break into a cemetery during the day and stake her. If you break in the cemetery at night, you don't have to worry about the police, but the vampire will be awake and capable of handling itself. So you'll have to actually fight it and kill it that way. Dracula is actually able to hunt the hunters. This is the sniffing them out situation. Once you have them and you can start trailing them, if you know where they are, you can follow them and just stay with them. And you need the GM for this to work. And then you can burst in on wherever they are and kind of attack them. Wait until maybe just one is alone resting in the hotel room or something. Okay. So after Dracula takes his move, some random events get rolled. And there's a little chart here to see what happens and shows up in the newspaper. Now, some events are, hey, somebody saw Dracula, or one of the female vampires killed a child or was caught prowling around in a weird area. But to mix up with those, there are also some random ones of all those types, including mysterious deaths and mysterious prowler deathbed. Now, whenever these things hit the newspaper, whether Dracula did them or not, they're going to increase the credibility rating. If nothing hits, they decrease the credibility rating by 1 each turn that there's no news stories. It's also possible to get a free character that way for the hunters. Whatever news stories there are will tell you, hey, something happened. Say there was let's look at one. Mysterious prowler at deathbed in Tottenham Court. The hunters don't know if that was Dracula or a random news story. But they can go to the known location, and if there's a GM, the GM will handle this. If not, Dracula will, and find out if they can get permission from, the family, whether or not it was Dracula who was there. Okay. For the vampire hunters themselves, they have a number of actions as well. They can attempt to recruit new hunters. It's important for them to boost their party. They start with one leader, Van Helsing. If they can get another leader, they can run in 2 parties. While that's weaker, it's good to be all strong and have everybody together for combat. It does help in terms of hunting down clues and breaking up coffins and the like. And you can also rest one party. Well, you can always rest some people other than the leader. The leader has to be present for any other actions, though. So that's probably a good thing to do early in the game, although hunting coffins is too. They can spend the whole day sleeping in order to rest from wounds or rest for a vigil. Finding new lodgings, that takes 2 hours to do. Movement, same as Dracula, 1 by 1. Searching, looking for coffins, destroying the coffins once found, searching the cemetery for vampires, investigating a victim takes an hour, blood transfusions, which they can give their own health to a victim to try to keep the victim from dying. I have never seen that actually done. Okay. And there's a listing of all the different hunters with, a little blurb from the history, which may or may not be from Dracula in some cases, like the Sherlock Holmes. It's a different character from a different story, but it adds something to the story as a whole. And I think that's about all I really want to cover. If Dracula's up during the day, he takes additional damage. He takes 5 strength for being awake during the daytime. The sun burns him. If the hunters are awake at night, in general, they take an extra point of fatigue for that, unless they're going to rest during the day. Playing without a GM, there's specific ways of handling this, where one player or the other, well, usually Dracula plays the GM's role because day moves aren't allowed and Hunter's Night moves aren't allowed, stuff like that. like I mentioned, you can play with enough players where it can be kind of a role-playing game for the hunters. It's not going to be for the vampire, though. And the GM, if there is one, can choose to kind of modify the rules in order to give a richer experience. I think I've given kind of an overview of it. I can't play this out solitaire very well. I've done it before, but it's really not a pleasant thing to do, and I don't think anybody's going to gain from it. So I kind of wanted to share a little bit of the game while it's fresh on my mind, rather than give the whole playthrough, which may never happen otherwise. I'll come back with a little bit of a review part. Okay. Undead. Let's take a thought about this or two. So, it's a game from an era when it wasn't a big deal that it was just a piece of paper. That's what you expected from Steve Jackson. You got nice, cheap games that could be quite interesting. About the same price as an S&T game, really. Somewhere around $4 I paid for these guys. Component quality, obviously less. Outside the plastic box, you don't have the die-cut counters. I don't think it was quite as big an operation, but they still put out quite a few copies of things like Ogre, Car Wars, Illuminati, and they were all put out in sort of the cheapest possible manner. The idea being, let's get out a really, really, interesting, fun, good game, sell it to kids who don't have a lot of money at a price they can afford it at, and not really worry too much about, trying to put it out in some snazzy components or whatever. And I'll tell you, at that age, and something in me says I get the exact opposite feeling now. But at that age, at that time, we ate it up. I mean, we really did. It was great to be able to, on your allowance money or whatever you stole at lunch from other kids playing poker, in my case, you could really pick up a game a week or whatever, without having a big influx of money available. Nowadays, I don't know, I have no idea what people get for allowances to their kids or whatever nowadays. But when I was young, I got $1 a week if I did my work. And that meant I pretty much lived off my poker winnings until I got a job. Because I didn't like, putting away the dishes or cleaning my room or those things that I had to do. And anyway, this was, a certain model that really worked at that time. And I don't know how much it works now. I see things like Fantasy Flight puts out the Silver Line stuff, and you kind of say, in a sense, it is hitting that concept, but it's not giving you the richness of the game, at least from what I've seen of those games. They tend to be little card games or something. You don't see, putting out in multiple installments something the size of Car Wars, which really was a huge, huge product before they came up with the compendium and all, and trying to get it all into a more deluxe version. So that's one thing to look at, is, you've got really, really cheap components on these, but I'll tell you, we didn't mind at the time. It always was kind of annoying, though, to have the counters fly all over the place. So that was kind of a gripe at all times, there's no question, but that was one aspect of it. Another is the innovation in something like this, and really in most of Steve Jackson's games, because he was really, at that time, he was really kind of cutting new ground. In this game, you've got, I think, the first, maybe not, Trying to think if Task Force Games put out one earlier. But you've got a very early one of these kind of, let's mix role-playing with a board game type thing. And you see it later in Hero Quest, and something I just did recently with my wife, as well as this. That's why this came to my mind, which is Mansions of Madness, where you're kind of mixing elements of the two styles of game in a way. Now, Game Master Minis games were around for a long, long time, especially in the military. Midway and I believe Pearl Harbor as well were both played out using a mini system with a Game Master. So it's not at all, a completely innovative idea there. But in terms of a marketable mixture of an interesting adventure game type game that's not a pure role-playing game but takes some of its ideas from how role-playing games worked, is something that I don't see much of that kind of innovation. You see games that follow that pattern that was set down back in, whatever. I don't know when this is. Let's look. Because that'll help me answer my other question. The other game I'm thinking of is Valkenburg Castle, which may have been, this is 81. I would be strongly suspicious that Valkenburg came out before this. Can't be possible. Can't be possible. Anyway, what else do we have? That innovative spirit that was touching almost every one of these Steve Jackson games. To tell you the truth, when you look at Car Wars, it went from running the cars on a solid straight track and just allowing them to shoot at each other, almost like a video game type situation, to, hey, we can really simulate all of this. And in both cases, that was really a jump away from things that had been being done. Illuminati, the whole cards being used not really like normal cards, but to build these little organizational webs and stuff. Again, totally a new thing, and we see things kind of like that since then. And in a sense, the collectible card games are kind of that way, where the cards aren't really cards; they're on the table and doing things. So there have been innovations here and there, but not at the low end for the most part. And that's what's so great about these suckers. This is as if We the People came out as a $5 game, maybe $10 in its time or something. Came out as a little thing that was as cheaply produced as it could be, but got this idea across. And there may be stuff on the web. There may be web published stuff that's going like that. But I don't see a lot of it. And in a way, the whole spirit of gaming seems to have moved away from that. Let's get games to people cheaply. They're good games. Make that our business model and make money off of it. To let's give them something that's better than a computer game, that has, nice big wooden or plastic pieces that they can chew on, and thick counters and all kind of other stuff. Really aim for that tactile sensation. And, in a sense, I can see it. I mean, do you really want something you have to pick up by spitting on your finger? I don't know, or trying to use tweezers. They are very helpful for this. You never see people playing Steve Jackson games with tweezers, but I have to say they work well. But yeah, that spirit's gone. And these are the games, so many people cite Ogre as their first war game. I'm kind of iffy on whether it's a war game, but let's not get into that debate. But it certainly led a lot of young kids into the science fiction, etc., towards understanding some of the base concepts of at least a tactical war game. It does share most of the features with one. The only question is really the topic. So I think that's something we're missing, you know. But it could be that kids these days have so much disposable income that there's nobody who's interested in that low end anymore. Or maybe that low end is somehow being provided by print and play stuff, and I just don't really, you know, I've pulled some down. I haven't seen anything that completely blew me away on the print and play side. So I really don't know though. Anyway, for its time, this was, as with most of these games, something very, very interesting. Something that didn't cost you a lot, but gave you a whole new vector and way of thinking about your games. A new design choice that was of significant direction. It wasn't just, hey, let's put out a cheaper version of... And some of the games did that. Task Force Games was notorious for putting out kind of cheap games that largely, even though I mentioned Valkenburg Castle, cheap games that didn't really expand the hobby in any direction. And I see companies now still putting those out. But maybe they're putting out some positive things too. You see, Victory Point Games puts out a lot of stuff that feels component-wise on this level. Yeah, the counters are a little bit. But they're up there in price competing with other things. I see low print run war games that showed up at Consim World with kind of cruddy components on that same level, but again at a price point that I could buy a brand new GMT game. You know, that doesn't work. That's not what we're talking about. That's trying to fill the niche market for those people who want a battle game on this battle and think it would be great, but there's no way they can get 500 people to subscribe to do it. They can get maybe 50, you know? Well, these companies can fit in there and make their margin to survive while still providing people with a game that they want. And that's great too, but that's not what we're talking about. We're looking at what is going to provide that entry-level option. And I don't really buy that you're going to get the entry-level young gamer looking at lots of different systems when Twilight Imperium sells at, what, 60, 80 bucks? And that's the thing that they want, you know? I think there was a cheaper alternative in the 80s with the Axis and Allies stuff, but it's not that much cheaper. Again, it was this, it still cost a lot. It's just the huge print runs made it a little bit cheaper than what some of the modern equivalents are able to do. But it seems to me that there's got to be a market open for people to be putting out interesting designs in the way that they were once, if you're going to get the kind of drawing players into the gaming world, not just giving them the same stuff again and again for cheap, and not giving them lots and lots of components that they have to really throw down. You know, if you're buying Twilight Imperium, and again, I don't know what kids make these days off their parents, but if you're buying Twilight Imperium and it's costing you, you know, a month or two's worth of it seems to me that's about a bicycle. You know, not an expensive bike, but you could get a cheap bike that way. Worth of your allowance money. Well, you're not going to do that several times. I can remember going and buying a new game just about every month. Every month. After I got a job. But yeah, you know, once you get hooked, though, you can make it a major element in your life. But how do you get hooked unless you see more than one or two games? You know, if you've got one or two games that you really like, those just become fixed and they become sort of this iconic thing. But you don't realize what else is out there. You're just interested in Those, and maybe the expansions for them, and that's it. To really grab someone, you need something like what existed before, and I just don't see that happening today. I'm not sure. It's kind of sad because I came from an era when there were just so many games and available and so many directions and people who came into the hobby from so many ways. I'm not sure I see that so much anymore, but we'll see. Okay, you know what? That went a little too tangential for even my usual stuff. So let's get back to the game for a little bit, because I want to talk a little bit about how it plays. I rated it an 8, based on the innovation and some fun that I've had in the past with it. It does not play well at all solitaire, which is a big hit for me, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to rate a game lower just because it's not a good solitaire game. 2-player, there's something very tedious about one person taking his turn and then swapping the room, basically. You know, you can't be looking at the map. It wouldn't be too bad if there's something to share, but you're not really playing a game with each other in that case. If we move to the 3-player, which is what it's really designed as, I can tell you it's interesting to be the GM, but you're not playing. You know, you've got nothing at stake there. And you're not really running the game in the same way as you are in a role-playing game. You don't have that hand of creativity in it for the most part. There's, you know, this exceptional rule that says, yeah, if the GM wants to kind of add things or make things up, that's cool. And that sort of frees that up and says, yeah, well, it's possible. But to be fair, I would not do that. I'd use the game as my framework, and if a player pushed real hard about doing something, and that's really the example given in the rules, Dracula wants to attack the investigators in prison for some reason, and is insistent about it and sees no reason why he shouldn't, well, the game master makes special rules to handle that circumstance. Maybe allowing a constable to be added to the investigator's party to shoot up the vampire or whatever. Well, that's fine, but that's still not the kind of, you know, full interaction of weaving the story for the players that is usually present in a game master game. It's really, you're just serving a mechanical role here as the game master. Now, I don't mind that at all. I rather like it, and that's what I liked about Mansions of Madness, which someday I'll get up one way or another. I may not be able to do that as a full player through either. I enjoy that sort of passive watching role. I don't like it in a solitaire game, but I like it when I'm playing with people watching their game happen. It doesn't matter if my game happens or not. I don't like it as much when I'm watching a competitive game, though. And I want to have some mechanical aspect I have to be doing in the game. And I feel like that works here. It's good for me, but I don't know if it would be good for many people. For the players, they're still doing that swap in and out. The person who would be running the entire game from their standpoint is now having the game run for them by the GM while they're playing it. The other person... Now, when I've run it and played it, usually there's been something else to have happen. Someone to go talk to or whatever. And I would really suggest that everybody have something else to keep them busy with. In my case, in this last game, my wife was sitting online during my turns and I would go play EU. But I felt like that was too frantic. In terms of trying to do something that took that much effort. Now, spamming online I could probably do pretty easily. But do you really want to be just wasting away time in between your turns. There's a problem. It's just, when you get up to do your turn, you kind of want to be somewhat punctual and timely in that. On the other hand, you don't want to be doing nothing during the other period of time. You don't want to just be waiting for your turn. Whatever it is you're doing, it's got this sort of mix. Now, personally, for me, interacting with other people fits in perfectly for that because, that's not really something, it can be entertaining, but it's not really something that I feel I have to keep doing. I don't mind walking away from a conversation in the middle of it. All right.